Hey, we're going to get started. I thank you for attending this lecture in the series on diversity and social justice in first-year classes. The routine is that Professor Butler will talk for a while, and then there'll be an opportunity for questions and discussion with you. I will carry the mic around because it's being recorded. And then we'll end promptly at, or maybe a little before, 12:50 so that we can get out in time for you to go to your classes and for the next class to come into this room. And that's it for me now.
Great. Thank you, Professor Tushnet, and thank you all for being here. So this series is about diversity, about social justice, and thinking about the 1L curriculum from those perspectives. So when I think about diverse voices and outsider perspectives, and the subject that I teach 1Ls, which is criminal law, I think about hip-hop. I think about what it was like being near the Boogie Down Bronx in the 1980s when hip-hop was being invented, what it was like at the same time being an African-American man in New York City and feeling the heavy presence of the police, but also the height of the crack epidemic, the height of the homicide epidemic in the late 1980s. So thinking about wanting to feel safe, safe from people who might harm you on the street, people who included people who look like me, and people who included the police. Wanting to feel safe from all of those. And then I became a prosecutor. And at the same time that I was listening to hip hop, and after a few years of doing that, teaching criminal law. So I want to connect all of those different kinds of experiences today. And the soundtrack is going to be hip-hop music.
So we just pray like the minister say, Abu Akbar, and throwing some hot cars. The things we see on the screen, it's not ours. But these from the hood, so these dreams not far. Where I'm from, the dope boys is the rock stars. But they can't cop cars without seeing cop cars. I guess they want us all behind bars.
So the idea is that if we listen to hip-hop, we'll have a criminal legal system that actually will be a criminal justice system. It'll work better, we'll be safer, and we'll treat people more fairly. The people who create hip-hop have what Foucault called subjugated knowledge, what critical legal theorists and critical race theorists call outsider knowledge, listening from the bottom. So when we listen from the bottom, we hear this conversation between Immanuel Kant and Kendrick Lamar, between Jeremy Bentham and Cardi B. So everyone may not know a whole lot about hip-hop, so a quick introduction. It's a billion-dollar industry. It's best-selling music and fashion. It's incredibly multicultural. The most important and best-selling artists are African American, but they're important Latino, white, and Asian artists as well. What about people who consume hip-hop? 70% of the consumers of hip-hop are, what am I going to say? 70% of people who consume hip-hop are what? Yeah, they're white. So how much influence does hip-hop have? So to think about that, I'm going to show a short excerpt from an iconic video. The artist is Jay-Z, the greatest rapper alive. And the song is called Dirt on Your Shoulders, Dirt Off Your Shoulders. So take a quick look. Don't worry if you don't catch everything. I want to point out a couple of things to look for. Really, I should say listen for. Listen to how great it sounds. The hip-hop that gets commercially produced is this amazing marriage of art and engineering, incredible production values. The artists have a lot of things. He'll have a lot of fun with how things sound. So listen. Look at the sex and gender stuff going on. The refrain is, if you're feeling like a pimp, then brush your shoulders off. But Jay-Z knows that there's this debate about whether hip-hop is more sexist than other forms of pop culture. And so his next line is, ladies, you can be pimps too. Pimps are just people who are large and in charge. So you see that some women in this video are depicted in highly sexual ways, and others are just as large and in charge as any man. Look at the presence of the police. So this is not a song about criminal justice. It's a song about living large, not letting life get you down. But still, in this video, you will see the police, as you do in virtually every hip-hop video, just like they are in many over-police communities. Over-police because the idea in hip-hop is that the police are not there to serve and protect. They're there to lock you up. And one last thing, look for the gesture that this video made famous. It's the brushing the dirt off your shoulders. It's like this. It means that's not a big deal. I'm not going to let that little thing get me down. Okay, so take a look. And again, it's hip-hop. It's music for grown folks. You're going to hear some bad words, so get ready for that.
Now tuned into the motherfucking greatest. Turn the music up in the headphones. Tim, you can go and brush your shoulders off, nigga. I got you. Yeah. If you feeling like a pimp, nigga, go and brush your shoulders off. Ladies is pimps too, go and brush your shoulders off. Niggas is crazy, baby, don't forget that boy told you kick. Yeah, turn up your shoulders. I'm proud of you. Get it, man, I'm straight up the block. I can run it back. Boys, you're straight up the
Roll out, slam talk in a minute.
shit, I'm out. Don't forget that boy told you kid. Turn up your shoulder, you got a 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 kid.
So one question in our Hip Hop 101 is, how much influence does hip hop have? So let's think about that. It's hard to believe that it's only been 10 years, barely 10 years. So much has happened. But actually, less than 10 years ago, Senator Obama and Senator Clinton were duking it out for the Democratic nomination. And in this clip, he's complaining about something that she said that he doesn't think is fair.
I understand that because that's the textbook Washington game. That's how our politics has been taught to be played. That's the lesson that she learned when the Republicans were doing that same thing to her back in the 1990s. So I understand it, and when you're running for the presidency, then you've got to expect it, and you've just got to kind of let it, That's what you got to do. That's what you got to do.
So was Barack Obama the first hip-hop president? He's definitely a fan.
Do you like hip-hop?
Of course.
Who do you like?
I got to admit, lately I've been listening to a lot of Jay-Z. I mean, this new American Gangster album is
What do you
tight.
like about it?
Yeah, it tells a story, and he's, as Jay would say, he's got flow. But Kanye, I like.
So hip-hop considers a lot of themes. It's obsessed with criminal justice. The fashion has evolved, but many of you know that hip-hop's original fashion actually started as a tribute to prison inmates. In many prisons, they take away your shoestrings and your belt because prison is such an inhumane place that they're afraid that you would kill yourself. The music, even more than the fashion, is obsessed with criminal justice issues. So J. Cole, he's one of the current best-selling artists. He has a really cool song called Crooked Smile, which is about empowering women. Its message is, ladies, don't worry if you have a crooked smile. You got to love you just like you are. So that's what the song's about. But in the middle, J. Cole wants to remind us of a real case involving a 7-year-old black girl named Aiyana Jones. Aiyana Jones, actually. She was killed by the police when they were executing a search warrant at her house. So in this very popular top 40 song, J. Cole is going to lift her up and also lift up a number of other criminal justice issues because they're connected. If this is what the police do in your community, would you want to cooperate with them? And so he'll raise the issue of snitching and income inequality and old-fashioned racism, all connected. So take a look.
Look at the nation, that's a crooked smile, braces couldn't even straighten. Seem like half the race is either on probation or in jail. Wonder why we inhale, cause we inhale already. I ask if my skin pale, would I then sell like Eminem or Adele? Well, one more time for the veil, and fuck all of that beef shit, nigga, let's make a meal. They officer make me don't want nobody getting killed. Just open up that cell, let my brother out of jail. I got money for the bill now, and well now, if you're asking will I tell now? Hey, hell nah, I ain't snitching cuz. Man, they get them niggas stitches now. If you was around and you wouldn't need a witness now, how you like this crooked smack?
So again, this is a top 40 song. This video gets played on MTV and BET. So what does that mean? It means that we're at an amazing moment in American history. When we listen to the radio, when we watch music videos, when we dance at clubs, when we sport the latest fashion, we are receiving a critique of the state. It's a message from what Chuck D, a Public Enemy, called the Black CNN. When hip-hop artists rap about criminal justice, it's often based on their own experience. Many of the artists have been locked up. And they have that in common with other African-American men. So in the last 20 years, these numbers have gone up for all men. For most of U.S. history, we've been around the 200 mark. If there's a sweet spot, I don't believe in natural law, but if there's a sweet kind of normal number for the number of people in a country who are locked up, it's around 200 per 100,000. That's where lots of countries that we like to compare ourselves to, and that's where we've been until the 1980s. What does it mean that a much larger percentage of African American men are locked up today than were locked up in the 1930s and 40s and 50s, when we tend to think of things as being more difficult for African American people? Does it mean that black men are more dangerous now than then? Of course not. It means that incarceration has become a new kind of social policy for dealing with young black and Latino men. When a large percentage of the people who you know and respect and love get locked up, then getting locked up begins to say more about the state than it does about the inmate. We're supposed to be disgusted with people who the law labels as criminals, but that would mean we were disgusted with 1 in 3 young African-American men. The hip-hop community consists of those men and other people who know and love them. It doesn't find them to be disgusting, quite the contrary. So get ready for some of the scariest words ever recorded in pop music. It's Jay-Z. He's going to compare the criminal, who he calls a hustler, to a soldier, and specifically a soldier in the war against terror. President Obama said that police officers should stop thinking of themselves as warriors. Rather, he said they should think of themselves as guardians. Jay-Z, you will hear, has a stronger critique. He thinks that cops are a bigger threat to African-American men than foreign terrorists.
This here's a ballad for all the fallen soldiers I'm about to show you how a hustler's life and a soldier's life parallel. And the one thing they got in common, a mother's pain. Picture split screen. On one side you got a hustler getting ready for the block, human being. Other side you got a soldier getting ready for boot camp. They both at war. Been Latin, been happening in Manhattan. Crack was anthrax back then, back when police was Al-Qaeda to black men. While I was out there hustling, sinning with no religion, he was off the wall killing for a living. Shout out to my niggas that's locked in jail, POWs that's still in the wall for real, for real. It's memory, don't cry, we all gonna die eventually. But if he's locked in the penitentiary, send him some energy. They all winners to me. What's up, memory?
So why would people think that folks in the penitentiary are winners? What's happened? What's happened to our society? What's happened is that the United States has used prison promiscuously. We have the highest rate of incarceration in the world. So many people in the African American community have gotten locked up, that getting locked up has lost its stigma. A black man who's born in the 1990s can expect statistically that at some point he will be arrested. So rap music depicts getting locked up as a rite of passage. So if you study sociology, you'll think about social norms, about how mass incarceration has changed the sense of what's normal in African American communities. But it's really just common sense, right? It's Psych 101. Everybody wants to like themselves, and people like themselves. So the message in hip hop is that any organization that's composed of people who are primarily like us must be kind of cool. It doesn't matter if it's Roxbury Community College, the Boston Celtics, or the Suffolk County Jail. So when people say that hip hop glorifies criminals, it's more accurate to think of it as respecting black men. It rejects the stigma that the criminal justice system tries to put on us. So listen to Angie Stone, respecting African American men.
Some say that he up to no good around the neighborhood. Well, for your information, a lot of my brothers got education. Now check it, you got your Wall Street brother, blue collar brother, you're down for whatever, chilling on the corner brother, a talented brother, and to every one of y'all behind bars, you know that Angie loves you.
So if you look at who's in prison according to the hip hop community, you don't see who's supposed to be there. So my criminal law students learned that prison, in theory, is for people who are the most dangerous or the most immoral. But hip hop says that's the theory, that's not the practice. Prison is really for minorities and poor people. It's a placement center for the undereducated, the unemployed, and the rebel. The government doesn't know what to do with these people, or it's too expensive to treat their issues, and so it locks them up. In hip hop, we have this historic repulsion at the idea of putting black people in chains. So there are constant comparisons between prison and slavery, including in this old school classic from KRS-One.
Like a sample, repeat it very quickly and approve, for example, overseer.
So hip hop isn't only describing how broken down things are now, it's also recommending how we could do better. So if you remember the philosopher Rawls, who said that law would be best made if it could be made by people who don't know who you're going to be in society. You don't know whether you're cis or trans, gay or straight, Asian or Latina, male or female. You make the best law because you want to be fair to everybody. We can't ever actually approach that nether world, but in terms of a criminal legal process, hip-hop comes pretty close because it's created primarily by black men who are most likely to be victims of crime. So they're very concerned about being safe, and also most likely to be incarcerated, arrested. So concerned about a fair process as well. So what would criminal justice look like in a hip-hop nation? So the art of hip-hop is the remix. So 3 main ideas. People who harm others should be harmed in return. So my criminal law students will recognize that as retribution. Retribution would be, I think, the main justification of punishment in a hip-hop nation. Second idea, criminals are human beings who deserve respect and love. And the third idea is that communities can be destroyed by crime and by punishment. So hip-hop says if you're going to kill or rape or rob, then you should be locked up. If you're going to hurt others, you should be put in a position where you can't do that. And again, not that surprising when we think that the people who create the culture are most likely to be victims of crime. But the story doesn't end there. In hip-hop, there are constant shout-outs to the incarcerated. You heard Angie Stone a few minutes ago, to all my brothers behind bars, Angie loves you. In part, the love and respect is based on sympathy for the reason why people commit crimes, the pervasive lack of opportunity, the massive unemployment, miserable schools, broken families. Punish him if you must, hip-hop says, but don't think of his choice the same way that you think of a rich guy's choice. One thing hip-hop recommends has to do with what we call collateral consequences, the effect of punishment on other people. So the idea in hip-hop is that punishment should be reduced when it harms people other than the criminal. So what's that mean? So what happens in the African American community when more of its college-age young men are actually in prison than in college? What happens to African American families when 1/3 of young black men have a criminal case? We could talk about Florida, where until recently 1/3 of the black men could not vote because they have a felony conviction. Or we can talk about the many people in the African American and Latino community, especially women and children, who are doing time on the outside. So this is Erykah Badu getting a call that's familiar to a lot of poor people. It's a collect call from prison. Her boyfriend's about to get out. She can't wait to see him, but she's scared because she thinks that he might start dealing again. So she's confused. For this sample, you should know that a Glock is a kind of gun.
Because I got the black on like the trunk stand. The black on cock, the block stand. Yeah, yeah. On like the trunk stand. Black on cock, the block stand. Black on like the trunk stand. Black on cock, the block stand. Black on cock, the trunk stay locked. Black on cock, the block stay high.
So a lot going on in that song from the brilliant Erykah Badu. Among other things, you can see her feminist critique from the lyrics up on the screen. I think her main point is to understand that punishment affects more than just the guy who's doing the time, and that judges ought to take that into account. If that sounds radical, then take a look at the federal sentencing guidelines. As you know, a corporation can actually be prosecuted for a crime. But the guidelines say that before prosecutors bring a case, they have to consider the effect of prosecution on shareholders and employees. And if the effect is too great, then prosecutors don't have to bring the case. Hip hop says, why not apply that to people as well as corporations? Canada, you should know, already does this. In Canada, Native Canadians, Indians, Eskimos are in some ways like African Americans in U.S. criminal legal processes. And when a judge sentences a Native Canadian, she has to think about the effect of her sentence on the whole community. So a couple last points, and then I want to open it up to your questions and comments and thoughts. In a hip-hop nation, what kind of crime would be punished? We've already established murder, rape, robbery, any crime where there's a victim, hip-hop would punish. Let's think about drugs. Again, thinking about the first-year curriculum, we don't talk about drugs in the criminal law. Having this conversation with some of my criminal law colleagues here, and none of us cover drugs for various reasons. But when we look at who gets locked up, especially who gets arrested, then drugs are a huge issue. Some people say that hip-hop glorifies drugs. It's partly true. It glorifies marijuana, for sure, and certain expensive kinds of liquor. The most vilified drug in hip-hop, I'd say, is the 40 ounce. That's a large can of beer that's sold almost exclusively in low-income neighborhoods. Hip-hop makes much of the fact that the people who sell that dangerous drug are mainly white and Asian American, and they get licenses by the government. People who sell other kinds of drugs get locked up. Should anybody be locked up for using or selling drugs? Again, in hip-hop, lots of comparisons to alcohol. Most of us don't have a family member who's addicted to heroin or crack or crystal meth. Some of us do. Most of us don't. Everybody in this room has a family member who's addicted to alcohol. By any count, alcohol is the worst drug, whether you're thinking about sickness, the death it causes, the lost economic productivity. In my criminal law class, we get to homicide tomorrow, actually, and we'll learn that about 50% of people who commit homicide are under the influence of alcohol. So it's the worst, right? Hip-hop says, yeah, and there's actually peer pressure to use that devastatingly harmful drug. So this is Kendrick Lamar.
Hold up.
Frank,
Headshot.
Frank,
Sit down.
Frank,
Stand up.
Frank,
Pass out.
Frank,
Wake up.
Frank,
Fade it.
Frank,
Fade it.
Now I done grew around some people living their life in bottles. Granddaddy had the golden flask, backstroke every day in Chicago. Some people like the way it feels. Some people want to kill their sorrow. Some people want to fit in with the popular. That was my problem. I was in a dark room, loud tunes, looking to make a vow soon that I'ma get up, filling up my cup. I see the crowd mood changing by the minute, and the record on repeat. Took a sip, then another sip. Then somebody said to me, why you babysitting? Only 2 or 3 shots. I'ma show you how to turn it up a notch. First you get a swimming pool full of liquor, then you dive in it. Pool full of liquor, then you dive in it. I wave a few bottles, then I watch them all fly. All the girls wanna play, they watch. I got a swimming pool full of liquor and they dive in it. Pool full of liquor, I'ma dive in it.
Hold up. Headshot.
Frank,
Sit down.
Frank,
Stand up.
Frank,
Pass out.
Frank,
Wake up.
Frank,
Fade it.
Frank,
Fade it.
Frank. Okay.
So how do we address that devastating problem? Well, we use the health care system to treat addicts, and we license the sellers. We don't lock folks up. But for other drugs, we do lock people up. Actually, I should be more specific, we lock black people up. So African Americans don't use or sell drugs more than anybody else. African Americans, according to the National Institute of Health, are about 12% of people who use drugs. The illegal transaction of selling drugs, purchasing drugs, tends to be segregated. White people report mainly buying drugs from other whites, African Americans, Latinos, the same. But if you look at who's incarcerated, 60% people locked up for drug crimes are black. So 12% of people who do the crime, 60% of people who do the time. Hip-hop often presents drug sellers as entrepreneurs. They're just business women and men. And in that view, they're no more immoral than people who sell other things that might be pleasurable, but that might also be bad for you. So think of cigarettes, think of prime rib. So this is Biggie Small, his dedication of his autobiographical song called Juicy.
Yeah, this album is dedicated to all the teachers that told me I never amount to nothing. To all the people that lived above the buildings that I was hustling from that called the police on me when I was just trying to make some money to feed my daughter. And all the niggas in the struggle, you know what I'm saying? It's all good, baby.
So hip-hop tells us that some of the people who sell drugs are actually pretty nice guys. We grew up with them. It's just that one guy went to college, the other guy went to stand on the corner. But some of those guys do dirty work. So this is Tupac explaining his difficult, complicated feelings about his mother, a brilliant political activist who for a while suffered from an addiction to cocaine. His dad, who wasn't in the picture, the drug sellers who actually helped raise him, and then why he went into that line of work.
I remember stress I caused, it was hell, hugging on my mama from a jail cell. And who thinking elementary? Hey, I see the penitentiary one day, running from the police, that's right. Mama catch me, put a whoop into my backside. And even as a crack fiend, mama, you always was a black queen, mama. I finally understand for a woman it ain't easy trying to raise a man. You always was committed, a poor single mother on welfare. Tell me how you did it, there's no way I can pay you back. But the plan is to show you that I understand. You all appreciate it. Don't you know we love you, sweet dear mama? Please, no one will love you, sweet. You all appreciate it. Don't you know we love you? Now ain't nobody tell us it was fair. No love for my daddy, cause the coward wasn't there. He passed away and I didn't cry, cause my anger wouldn't let me feel for a stranger. They say I'm wrong and I'm heartless, but all along I was looking for a father, he was gone. I hung around with the thugs, and even though they sold drugs, they showed a young brother love. I moved out, started really hanging. I needed money of my own, so I started slanging. I ain't guilty, cause even though I sell rocks, it feels good putting money in your mailbox. I love paying rent when the rent's due. Hope you got the diamond necklace that I sent to you.
So the bottom line is that in a hip-hop nation, people would not go to prison for using or selling drugs. It's not like artists think, most of the artists think like I do, that it's a victimless crime. Their concern is more about selective enforcement against black people, and that we need the kind of massive investment in communities that give young people options other than selling drugs. So the idea is to send the message that the government wants to actually help you and not just lock you up. So one last idea to think about, again, that hip-hop thinks about all the time, that we don't talk so much about in criminal law, and that's conditions of punishment. So in criminal law, we think a lot about why people are punished, not so much how. The idea of punishing people by caging them is, historically speaking, new. Prison was invented in Pennsylvania in the late 1700s. It was supposed to be a humane alternative to the way that people were punished before prison, which was by killing them or hurting their bodies or banishing them from the community. So how's the experiment worked? Nobody's in a better position to know than the young black men who create hip hop. They're the most incarcerated group of people in the history of the United States. What do they tell us? The experiment has been a miserable failure. It's inhumane. Prison is counterproductive. It's like sending people to a finishing school for crime. This is DMX describing the vicious cycle.
What we seeing is the streets, the cops, the system, harassment, the options, get shot, go to jail, or get your ass kicked. The lawyers, the part, they are of the puzzle, the release, the warning, try not to get in trouble. The snitches, the eyes, probation, parole, the new charge, the bail, the warrant, the hole, the cell, the bus, the ride, up north, the greens, the boots, the yard, you caught, the fighting, the stabbing, the pulling, the grabbing, the riot squad with the captain, nobody knows what happened. The 2 years in a box, revenge, the plots, the 23 hours that's locked, the 1 hour that's not, the silence, the dark, the mind, so fragile, the wish that the streets would have took you when they had you, the days, the months, the years, the despair, one night on my knees, here it comes, the prayer.
So for that point, I think in a hip-hop nation, prison wouldn't be used just to send a message. It wouldn't be used to punish people for victimless crimes. It would only be used to isolate people who posed a significant risk of causing physical harm to other people if they weren't locked up. So that's it. Again, if I had more time, I could talk about lots of other really interesting ideas in hip hop. I'll give you a coming attraction. I'm left of hip hop in terms of what I think our criminal justice system is doing and what I think it needs to do and how it can be improved. So some of these ideas about hip hop are in my first book, Let's Get Free, A Hip Hop Theory of Justice, also in an article in the Stanford Law Journal, which you could find. You can get the book from our library. You can get the article on Westlaw. So it's kind of a liberal point of view, Westlaw Alexis. It's kind of a liberal point of view. Since I wrote that, my views have evolved. I think I'm probably more radical now, again, to the left of hip hop. So some of my newer thinking about the issues with our criminal legal process are in my new book, Chokehold. So on March 7th, the same time, I'm going to be giving a talk about chokehold, those new ideas. Some of those ideas, the radical ideas, I also learned from hip hop. So that's the last clip I'll show. I'm thinking a lot, as are people in the movement for Black Lives, about abolition as a strategy, about how that's often been an approach to racial justice, abolition of slavery, abolition of the old Jim Crow, and now abolition of the new Jim Crow. So in Chokehold, the new book, I think a lot about what that means. And again, learning from hip hop there. So this is the last clip. You've heard this song a million times. Now think of it as a song about abolition.
Attica, send them to Africa. Imagine that.
I free all my sons. I love them, baby. Black diamonds and pearls.
Could it be, if you could be mine, we both shine.
If I rule the world,
Still living for today, in these last days of time.
we'll walk right up to the sun, hand in hand. We'll walk right up to the sun. We won't land. We'll walk right up to the sun, hand in hand. We'll walk right up to the sun. We won't land.
So Justice Clarence Thomas said that when he was a judge in D.C., he would look out the window of his chambers and he would see all of these young black men going to criminal court in chains. And he would think, there but for the grace of God, go I. President Obama, he spoke at the NAACP a couple years ago, same phrase, there but for the grace of God, go I. My friends, the determination of who goes to criminal court in chains should not be so fortuitous, should not depend so much on race and class. As long as it does, we need to listen to hip hop. Thank you. And thanks to Professor Tushnet for being such a fabulous VJ. Who knew?
So there's time for some time for questions and discussion. I will bring the mic around to anybody who wants to comment.
Questions, comments? I'm a law professor. It's my job to be provocative, so hope some of you were provoked. What do you think?
Hi, I am wondering, considering how many students are at Harvard Law School, if you could give students the directive to go forth in the world and do whatever you think would accomplish any racial justice goals that you have, what careers would you encourage people to pursue?
So don't be a prosecutor. That's another chapter in Let's Get Free. So, and I say that because people hear that prosecutors have all of this power and discretion. And so now we have a phenomenon of people thinking, well, I want to reduce incarceration. I want to reduce race disparities. And in the old days, they would be a defender, or they go work on policy or run for office. But now, some people want to be prosecutors. And I get that. That's what I tried as well. So I was a prosecutor, went in as an undercover brother, hoping to make a difference from the inside. But for reasons that I describe in Let's Get Free, that's not what happens. And in my experience, it's as a line prosecutor, you don't have the kind of power that you might. You have more delegated authority. The head prosecutor, she is powerful. She's the most powerful actor in our legal process. She can do whatever she wants. But she's also a political actor. She has to respond to the dysfunctional politics of race and crime. And so all the ways that you think you could make a difference, if it's a second or third drug offense, domestic violence, the victim wants to drop charges, there's already procedures in place, and you have to go along with it. And those procedures tend to be fairly tough. It's not like people will think you're a bad guy if you have a lot of concern for defendants, but they'll wonder, well, why are you a prosecutor? We have an adversarial system. If that's your concern, you should be a defense attorney. So don't be a prosecutor. Again, it's a larger conversation. Happy to have it with folks one-on-one in my office, as I already have with some of you. As a defense attorney, I don't think that defense attorneys create systemic change. Now, I'm having this debate on paper with another professor here, John Rapping, who disagrees with me. He thinks that defenders do create systemic change. And I should say, a lot of prosecutors disagree with me on that point. I've had a debate on that issue with a number of elected prosecutors. So if you Google me and should good people be prosecutors, you'll find YouTube debates with me. So you get the other side on prosecutors as well. Defenders do make an enormous difference with individual clients. My first job after my 1L year here at Harvard, I worked at the Public Defender Service in DC. And Charles Ogletree was still there. And he gave me some of the best advice that I'll give to you. I've already given this advice to some of you. During your summer, if you're working near a courthouse and you want to be a criminal lawyer, spend as much time as you can just sitting in the courthouse and watching what happens. Watch the pleas, the sentencings, the trials. You'll learn so much just by sitting there, and you'll never have that luxury again when you start practicing on someone's dime. So when I did that at Professor Ogletree's advice, I was 30 years younger. But going to court, so I wouldn't wear shorts, wear a nice pair of pants and button-down shirt. Every single day, a defense attorney would come up to me thinking that I was her client. And often, it was the day of trial, and she wouldn't even know what her client looked like. So defenders do make an enormous difference in the lives of individual folks, even if, again, I don't think they help create systemic change. Go into policy, run for office, lots of ways that you might be able to make a difference. And again, I think, as I talk about in Chokehold, reform isn't going to work with regard to our criminal legal process. We need transformation. And that's a whole larger conversation with people like Professor Tusnet have been involved in about whether the law can create transformation. Other questions, comments?
Thank you. I was just wondering about the idea of sort of selling out, both at Harvard and in hip hop. The idea that, today Jay-Z raps about being a business mogul. Kanye West, like the struggles he faces as a black man are in part like acceptance amongst like fashion's elite. And I wonder how you sort of think about that process in hip hop and how we might be conscious of it at Harvard Law School, where there's so many opportunities to pursue private gain or not to the common good.
Yeah, so in a way, for both, it's a question about agency, right? So with popular culture, there's always an issue with co-modification. The fact that it's popular means that it's often mass-produced, right? So that requires a form of production that might limit some of the integrity. Some people worry. And there's definitely some of that. Again, I could talk about a hip-hop theory of criminal justice. I couldn't talk about a hip-hop theory about marriage equality or about immigration. Hip-hop thinks about that stuff, but it's all over the place. On criminal justice issues, I think the nation is kind of united. And so it's not that there are not those other concerns, but at the end of the day, the artists are aware of those. And they're able to get the kinds of messages out that we've seen. So the way that I hear your question is, again, about agency and about integrity. In spite of all of the commercial concerns and in spite of everything else that's going on in their lives in the world, is there something that the artist is able to do that fulfills her responsibility? Can she filter that through everything else? And I think that we've seen that the answer is yes. So I specifically chose stuff that gets played on the radio, videos that get played on MTV, a playlist on Spotify. None of this is art music. There is art music in hip hop called conscious music, but this is everyday stuff. And so when you hear Angie Stone saying, to all my brothers behind bars, I love you. And that's played on the radio. We're supposed to forget about those people. And Angie Stone, she's a rich R&B singer, but somehow she's not going to let us. Danger by Erykah Badu. Again, the sample is a Colette call from prison. I heard that at a club in Atlanta. People were dancing to that. So again, there's some kind of genius that these artists are doing. We're supposed to forget about the 2.5 million people who are locked up. But you can't listen to urban radio more than 30 minutes without being reminded of them. So again, they're not activists, they'll often say, but I think a lot of the artists are fulfilling their responsibility. And again, that's the lesson for you. You're not selling out by coming here. The question is, can you, consistent with other kinds of things that you want to do in your life, can you remain true to the commitments that brought you here?
Thank you very much, Professor Butler. We do have to stop because of the schedule. I want to remind people that next Wednesday at this time, Professor Cheryl Cashin of the Georgetown University Law Center will be giving the Biddle Lecture, which thematically is going to be, if not quite a follow-up, continuous with what Professor Butler talked about today. And then in 2 weeks, this series will renew with a lecture by Professor William Rubenstein on issues of class in civil procedure. So I invite you all to go next week to the Biddle Lecture, and then to return here in 2 weeks for Professor Rubenstein's lecture. Thank you very much.
You bet. Thank you.